You know what they say about hindsight being 2020? They're wrong. Sometimes you see everything clearly in the moment, and you just choose to let it play out anyway. Sometimes you sit there, perfectly aware that your marriage is about to implode in front of 47 people, and you decide that's exactly what needs to happen. Everyone thought I was embarrassed that night. They thought I was humiliated, caught off guard, devastated by my husband's public cruelty. They were wrong about every single thing. The embarrassment wasn't mine. The devastation wasn't mine. And I certainly wasn't caught off guard. I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. That dinner, the one where my marriage died in front of our closest friends and family, that wasn't some spontaneous meltdown. It wasn't my husband finally showing his true colors after years of hiding them. No. That dinner was the culmination of 3 weeks of the most careful planning I'd ever done in my life. The humiliation was planned, all right, just not by him. See, here's what nobody understands about timing. It's not about when you discover the truth, it's about when you choose to use it. And I chose that night, that dinner, that audience, because sometimes the only way to end something properly is to let everyone see exactly what it really was. Let me take you back to 3 hours before everything fell apart, when we were still pretending to be the golden couple celebrating 15 years of marriage. The Harbor Club's private dining room was perfect, intimate enough to feel special, large enough to accommodate everyone who mattered to us professionally and personally. The kind of place where reputations are built and, as it turns out, destroyed. I remember standing in the doorway, watching David work the room. He was in his element, charming smile, firm handshakes, that easy laugh that made everyone feel like they were in on some wonderful secret. He moved from group to group like he was conducting an orchestra, each conversation perfectly timed, each joke landing exactly where it needed to. From the outside, we looked like everything a successful couple should be. David, 43, partner at Morrison and Associates, the kind of lawyer who got written about in the business section. Me, 39, head of marketing at Northridge Communications, the woman who'd turned 3 failing campaigns into industry case studies. We looked like we belonged together, like we'd built something real and lasting and worth celebrating. But I'd learned something in those 3 weeks leading up to the dinner. I'd learned that David wasn't performing for these people. He was performing as himself. The man I'd been married to for 15 years was a character he played at home, a role he'd perfected to keep me quiet, compliant, and most importantly, useful. You want to know when I first suspected something was wrong? It wasn't when I found the texts, though those came later. It wasn't when I noticed him working late more often, or when he started taking phone calls in the other room. It was when he started telling different stories about me to different people. I have this habit, maybe you'd call it a flaw, of really listening to conversations. Not just waiting for my turn to talk, but actually absorbing what people say and how they say it. So when David's colleague Mark mentioned how difficult it must be for David to manage my episodes, I paid attention. When his sister Jennifer made a sympathetic comment about how patient David was with my moods, I filed that away too. The thing is, I don't have episodes. I don't have moods any more than any normal person has moods. But David had been carefully, systematically painting me as unstable for months, maybe longer, creating a narrative where he was the long-suffering husband dealing with an increasingly difficult wife. That night at the Harbor Club, I watched him establish that narrative again and again. A gentle touch on my arm when I spoke, as if he was managing me. A soft laugh when someone asked about our plans for the future, followed by, "Well, we'll see how things go." Small comments, barely noticeable individually, but collectively they painted a picture of a man on the edge of making a difficult decision about his troubled marriage. The guests began arriving at 7. David's partners from the firm, my colleagues from Northridge, his family, my family, friends we'd collected over the years like trophies proving how social and successful we were. Everyone dressed perfectly, everyone bringing gifts and congratulations and that particular kind of enthusiasm people reserve for other people's milestone celebrations. I moved through the early part of the evening like I was floating above myself, watching this woman who looked like me shake hands and accept compliments and smile at jokes about marriage and commitment. Inside, I felt like I was made of ice and steel, cold and sharp and absolutely clear about what was coming. David gave his speech first. Of course he did. He always went first. He stood at the head of the table with a glass of champagne in his hand and talked about partnership, about growing together, about how marriage was about supporting each other through challenges. He talked about my career successes like they were small victories he'd helped me achieve. He talked about our future like it was something he was generously offering to share with me, and everyone ate it up. They smiled and nodded and raised their glasses, because David was so charming, so articulate, so obviously devoted to his wife. They had no idea they were watching a man lay the groundwork for his own destruction. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it brief. I thanked everyone for coming. I talked about how much I'd learned about people in 15 years of marriage. About how sometimes you think you know someone completely, and then you discover layers you never imagined existed. About how truth has a way of revealing itself when you're patient enough to wait for it. I could see David watching me, trying to read between the lines, but there was nothing for him to find. Not yet. I was saving everything for later. The real trouble started, as it always did with David, after his third glass of wine. That was his magic number. Enough to loosen his tongue, not enough to make him obviously drunk. He became funnier at 3 glasses, more animated, more willing to push boundaries that sober David would carefully avoid. It was my colleague Sarah who asked the innocent question that lit the fuse. So what's the secret? 15 years and you two still seem so happy together. What's your advice for those of us still figuring it out? I watched David's face change. Not dramatically, he was too controlled for that. But I saw the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his smile shifted into something sharper. He saw an opening, and David never missed an opening. The secret, he said, swirling his wine, is managing expectations. Sarah, you know how demanding your job can be, right? Well, imagine coming home to someone who thinks your job is just an excuse to avoid dealing with real problems at home. The table went quiet. Not dramatically, but you could feel the energy shift, the way conversations pause when someone says something that doesn't quite land right. David, I said quietly, but he was already warming up. I'm just saying, marriage is about balance. It's about one person not needing to be the center of attention all the time. It's about understanding that some of us have responsibilities that extend beyond our own immediate needs. He was looking directly at me when he said it, and I realized this was the moment I'd been waiting for. This was David showing everyone who he really was, and more importantly, who he thought I was. My friend Lisa tried to change the subject. Well, I think you're both wonderful, she said with forced brightness. But David wasn't done. Lisa, you're sweet, but you don't live with her. You don't know what it's like to walk on eggshells because someone hasn't gotten enough attention that day. You don't know what it's like to have your every decision questioned, your every choice criticized. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. I could see people looking at their plates, at their phones, anywhere but at me. They were embarrassed for me, these people who thought they were watching my public humiliation. But here's what they didn't know. I'd been waiting for this moment for 3 weeks, ever since I'd found the messages on David's phone. Ever since I'd discovered that this narrative he was spinning, the difficult wife, the patient husband, wasn't just dinner party conversation. It was his exit strategy. That's when I noticed him. Marcus Chen, sitting 3 seats down from me, perfectly still while everyone else squirmed in their chairs. Marcus, who worked in David's firm, but whom I'd barely spoken to in the 5 years I'd known him. Marcus, who was watching this unfold with the same calm attention I'd see on a surgeon's face during a delicate operation. When David paused to take another sip of wine, Marcus cleared his throat softly. David, he said, and his voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the room. You might want to be careful about accusing people of needing attention. David turned to him, eyebrows raised. I'm sorry, what's that supposed to mean? It means, Marcus said, still in that same calm voice, that some of us know about the Meridian Hotel. Room 412, Tuesday afternoons for the last 8 months. The silence that followed was different from the previous uncomfortable pauses. This was the kind of silence that comes when everyone in a room realizes they're witnessing something they can't unknow. David went very still. Marcus, I think you've misunderstood something. Have I? Because I think room service records are pretty clear about who's been ordering champagne for two every Tuesday. I think credit card statements are pretty specific about timing. And I think Amanda deserves better than being publicly humiliated to cover for your guilt. And there it was. Not from me, not in some dramatic confrontation, but stated simply and factually by a man who had apparently been waiting for this moment as long as I had. David looked around the table, and for the first time all evening, I saw him truly caught off guard. His practiced charm deserted him completely. This is... this is not the time or place for... For what? I asked, and my voice was steady and clear. For the truth? I thought marriage was about truth, David. Wasn't that in your speech? He turned to me, and I could see him scrambling, trying to find his footing. Amanda, let's not do this here. Let's go home and talk about this privately. Why? You were so eager to discuss our marriage publicly a minute ago. You were so comfortable telling everyone about my failings, my neediness, my inability to understand your responsibilities. Why should the truth be different? I could see people starting to realize that something had shifted, that maybe I wasn't the victim they thought I was, that maybe I'd known exactly what was happening. You knew, David said, and it wasn't a question. Of course I knew. I've known for weeks. I've known since I found the texts where you called me a necessary inconvenience. Since I found the emails where you told her about my episodes and my mood swings and how difficult I was to live with. Since I realized you weren't just cheating on me, David. You were building a case against me. The room was dead silent now. No one was even pretending to eat. You want to know what our marriage has really been like? I continued, and my voice was getting stronger, not weaker. It's been 15 years of me making myself smaller so you could feel bigger. 15 years of me managing your image, your career, your reputation, while you systematically undermined mine. 15 years of me believing that love meant accepting less than I deserved. David's face had gone pale. Amanda, please, not like this. Not like what? Not publicly? Not in front of people who matter to your career? You mean the way you've been destroying my reputation publicly for months? The way you've been telling people I'm unstable, difficult, impossible to live with? That kind of public? I stood up then, and every eye in the room was on me. Here's what you all need to know. 3 weeks ago, I hired a private investigator. Not because I was suspicious, but because I needed documentation. See, when someone is systematically destroying your reputation while secretly planning to leave you, you need evidence. You need proof that the narrative they're creating isn't true. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila folder. David has been having an affair with Jennifer Walsh from his office, but that's actually the least interesting part of this story. The interesting part is that they've been planning this for almost a year, planning not just to be together, but to ensure that when this marriage ended, David would come out looking like the victim, the long-suffering husband who finally couldn't take any more. David was frozen, staring at the folder in my hands. See, David needed me to look unstable because he needed to justify what he was planning to do. He needed people to think I was the problem, because that made him the solution. And he almost succeeded, except he made one crucial mistake. I opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He put it in writing. An email to Jennifer Walsh dated 2 months ago, outlining exactly how he planned to manage Amanda's increasing instability to create a clear path forward. His words, not mine. The silence stretched on and on. People were staring at David now, not me. So when you ask me what the secret to a successful marriage is, I continued, looking directly at Sarah, I'd say it's this. Never let someone convince you that your reality isn't real. Never let someone make you smaller to make themselves feel bigger. And never, ever underestimate what a woman is capable of when she stops trying to save a relationship and starts trying to save herself. David finally found his voice. You can't, you can't just, can't what? Can't defend myself? Can't refuse to be the villain in your story? Can't decline to be publicly humiliated to make your exit easier? I was standing now, and I felt taller than I had in years. Actually, David, I can. I can do all of those things. And I just did. People were starting to move, chairs pushing back from the table, conversations happening in whispers, the unmistakable energy of a gathering that was breaking apart. The marriage was over the moment you decided I was something to be managed instead of someone to be loved, I said. Tonight was just letting everyone else in on the secret. But let me back up, because none of this, none of the clarity, none of the strength, none of the perfect timing happened by accident. This is the part of the story I need you to understand, because it's the part that changed everything. 3 weeks and 4 days before that dinner, I was in our home office looking for the warranty information for our dishwasher. David keeps all our important papers in a filing cabinet next to his desk, organized with the kind of precision that made him such a good lawyer. I was looking through the household folder when I saw a folder I didn't recognize, labeled simply Personal DM. I almost didn't open it. Even after 15 years of marriage, I respected David's privacy. But something about the placement of it, hidden between insurance documents and tax returns, made me curious. And when I opened it, my entire world shifted. Inside were printed emails between David and Jennifer Walsh. Not love letters. I almost could have handled love letters. These were business communications. Strategic planning documents about the dissolution of our marriage. Jennifer wasn't just his lover, she was his advisor, his collaborator in a months-long campaign to reframe our marriage as a source of constant stress and disappointment in his life. They had spreadsheets, actual spreadsheets documenting my episodes, dates, times, witnesses, most of which I realized as I read through them were completely fabricated. According to their records, I had thrown a tantrum at the Hendersons' barbecue in May because David forgot to introduce me to his new client. In reality, I'd spent most of that party in the kitchen helping Helen Henderson with the food because their caterer had canceled last minute. According to their documentation, I had made a scene at the firm's Christmas party because I felt ignored. In reality, I'd left early because I had food poisoning and spent the entire evening apologizing to people for having to cut conversations short. But the most devastating document was David's action plan for transition. A step-by-step guide to establishing a pattern of my instability that would justify his departure and minimize any potential financial consequences in a divorce. It included specific strategies for public events, social media presence, and witness cultivation, getting mutual friends to observe and remember my allegedly problematic behavior. I sat in that office for 2 hours, reading through 15 months of careful, systematic character assassination. And here's what broke my heart. It was working. When I thought back to recent social interactions, I could remember the subtle changes in how people treated me. The careful way Lisa asked if I was doing okay after the book club meeting where David had loudly apologized for my mood. The sympathetic look in my sister's eyes when David made jokes about my sensitivity at family dinner. He hadn't just been cheating on me. He'd been stealing my reality, replacing it with a version where I was the problem that needed to be solved. That night, I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't throw things or scream or do any of the things the woman in his files might have done. Instead, I made copies of everything. Then, I called Marcus Chen. You see, Marcus and I had worked together on a pro bono case 2 years earlier, and I'd learned that beneath his quiet exterior was one of the sharpest legal minds I'd ever encountered. More importantly, I'd learned that Marcus had very strong feelings about people who abused their power to hurt others. When I showed him the documents, his face went through a series of emotions I'd never seen before: disgust, anger, and finally, cold determination. "Amanda," he said, "this isn't just infidelity. This is fraud. Emotional fraud, but fraud nonetheless. He's been systematically destroying your credibility to position himself for a favorable divorce. In some states, this could be considered abuse." "What can I do?" I asked. "Legally? Quite a lot. Practically? even more. But first, we need to document everything, every interaction, every conversation, every time he tries to make you look unstable in front of witnesses. We need to show the pattern. That's when we came up with the plan, not to catch David in his affair. That was easy enough to prove. But to catch him in the act of psychological manipulation, to create a situation where he would reveal his true intentions to a room full of people who mattered to both our careers. The anniversary dinner was my idea. David thought it was a gesture of reconciliation, an attempt to show everyone how committed I was to our marriage. He saw it as the perfect opportunity to demonstrate his patience with his increasingly erratic wife. I saw it as the perfect stage for him to destroy himself. For 3 weeks, I played the part he expected me to play. I was a little more emotional, a little more needy, a little more unpredictable. Not dramatically, David was too smart to fall for obvious bait, but just enough to make him confident that his strategy was working. I asked him more questions about his schedule. I made small comments about feeling left out of his work life. I suggested we spend more time together, go to more social events, be more visible as a couple. All things that the woman in his files would do, but also things that would give him more opportunities to demonstrate his patience with my neediness. And David took every piece of bait I offered. He became more solicitous in public, more obviously long-suffering. He made more comments about my emotional state to mutual friends. He positioned himself more clearly as the victim of an increasingly difficult marriage. What he didn't know was that Marcus and I were documenting everything. Every public interaction, every witness to David's performance of martyrdom. We were building a countercase, showing the pattern of manipulation and character assassination. The anniversary dinner was supposed to be David's masterpiece. A room full of influential people, a celebration of our marriage, the perfect setting for him to demonstrate how impossible I'd become and how patient he was in dealing with it. Instead, it became his courtroom, and Marcus had all the evidence he needed to prove David's guilt. The part that still amazes me is how completely David underestimated everyone in that room. He thought they were his audience, there to witness my breakdown and his restraint. He never considered that they might be intelligent enough to recognize manipulation when they saw it. He never imagined that someone like Marcus might have been waiting for exactly this moment to reveal the truth. After Marcus dropped his bombshell about the hotel room, the dinner fell apart quickly. People made polite excuses and left in pairs and small groups, offering me quiet words of support and studiously avoiding eye contact with David. Within 30 minutes, the private dining room that had been full of celebration was empty except for David, Marcus, and me. David sat at the head of the table, staring at his hands. "How long have you known?" he asked finally. "Which part? The affair?" "About 8 months. The systematic campaign to make me look unstable? 3 weeks." He looked up at me then, and I saw something I'd never seen in David's face before. Fear. "What do you want?" "Nothing," I said. "I want absolutely nothing from you. No money, no property, no explanations, no apologies. I want you to disappear from my life as completely as possible. The house is mine. Check the deed. It's been in my name since my grandmother left me the down payment. The one you told people was our starter home that you generously agreed to help me afford. My things will be packed and ready for pickup tomorrow. Marcus has the details." David looked around the empty room, at the remnants of our anniversary celebration, at the life that had just ended. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said. "No," I agreed. "It was supposed to happen with me looking crazy, and you looking like the victim. It was supposed to happen with everyone feeling sorry for you and wondering what took you so long to leave your unstable wife. But that plan required me to actually be unstable, and I'm not." That was 6 months ago. The divorce was finalized last month. Quietly, quickly, with none of the drama David had been preparing for. Without the narrative of my instability to fall back on, he had no grounds for anything more than a standard dissolution of marriage. The fallout was swift and thorough. Jennifer Walsh was quietly asked to leave the firm when it became clear that her relationship with David had created liability issues. David himself lasted another 2 months before the partners decided his judgment had been compromised beyond repair. Word travels fast in legal circles, especially when it involves one partner systematically destroying his wife's reputation to cover his own misconduct. My reputation, on the other hand, recovered completely. Turns out that when people realize they've been manipulated, they tend to overcorrect in the other direction. Colleagues who had been treating me with careful sympathy suddenly remembered all the times my competence and professionalism had impressed them. Friends who had been making allowances for my sensitivity recalled that I'd never actually been sensitive, just married to someone who wanted them to think I was. The most satisfying part wasn't David's professional collapse, though that was gratifying in its completeness. The most satisfying part was the silence. For months, I'd been bracing myself for his attempts to reinsert himself into my life. The angry phone calls, the dramatic gestures, the attempts to rewrite history or claim misunderstanding. But none of that ever came, because David isn't actually the passionate, emotional man he pretended to be during our marriage. He's a strategist, and strategists know when they've lost completely. 3 weeks after the dinner, he did try once. He showed up at my office wanting to explain and work things out. But the conversation lasted exactly 4 minutes because I'd learned something crucial in those weeks of planning. You don't have to engage with someone who has proven they can't be trusted with your reality. David, I said, when he started talking about misunderstandings and mistakes, this conversation is over. You can't just refuse to talk to me. We were married for 15 years. And for at least 15 months of those years, you were systematically trying to make me believe I was someone I'm not. You were stealing my reality and replacing it with one that served your purposes. That's not a misunderstanding. That's abuse. And I don't negotiate with people who abuse me. He tried to argue, tried to convince me that I was overreacting, that he'd never meant to hurt me. But I'd already learned the most important lesson of the entire experience. When someone shows you who they really are, you don't have to give them the opportunity to explain it away. The conversation is over, I repeated. You need to leave. And he did. Because even David could recognize when his manipulation tactics had stopped working. That was the last time we spoke. Our communication goes through lawyers now, brief and factual and completely without emotion. I get periodic updates about his attempts to rebuild his career in other cities, his struggles to find firms willing to overlook his reputation for poor judgment and ethical flexibility. I feel nothing about these updates. Not satisfaction, not pity, not curiosity. Just the vast, peaceful indifference you feel toward someone who used to matter, but doesn't anymore. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry, if I hate him, if I'm bitter about the years I lost, or the reputation I had to fight to reclaim. And I understand why they ask. It seems like the natural response to betrayal on that scale. But here's what I learned in those 3 weeks between discovering the truth and revealing it. Anger is something you feel when you're powerless, when someone is doing something to you and you can't stop them. What I felt instead was clarity. Cold, sharp, absolutely focused clarity about what needed to happen and how to make it happen. David spent 15 months trying to convince everyone that I was unstable. In the end, the most stable thing I ever did was refuse to play the role he'd written for me. I live alone now in the house that was always mine, and I've never been more at peace. Not because I won some battle against David, though I suppose I did, but because I finally learned the difference between being loved and being managed. I learned that my reality belongs to me, and I'm the only one who gets to decide what it looks like. The house is quiet in ways it never was when David lived here. No more performance, no more careful management of his moods and needs, and endless appetite for attention and validation. No more walking on eggshells or second-guessing my own perceptions or wondering if I really was as difficult as he made me feel. Just silence and space, and the kind of deep, bone-level peace you only get when you stop trying to be someone else's version of yourself. Sometimes I think about that night at the Harbor Club, about the moment when Marcus spoke up and changed everything, about the look on David's face when he realized his carefully constructed narrative was falling apart in front of the only audience that mattered to him. But mostly, I think about the moment afterward when the room was empty and I was still standing, still intact, still myself, despite 15 months of someone trying to convince me and everyone else that I was someone else entirely. That's the moment that mattered. Not the public revelation of David's deception, not his professional downfall, not even the satisfaction of seeing justice served. The moment that mattered was realizing I had survived someone's systematic attempt to erase my reality. I had survived, and more than that, I had refused to be erased. They say that the best revenge is living well. I think they're wrong. The best revenge is living authentically. It's refusing to let someone else's narrative about you become more real than your own experience. It's standing in your truth even when everyone around you has been convinced it's a lie. David thought he could rewrite me. He thought he could take 15 years of my life and turn them into evidence of my inadequacy, my instability, my fundamental unworthiness of love and respect. He thought he could make me complicit in my own destruction. He was wrong about everything. But he was most wrong about this. He thought I would break. He thought that if he applied enough pressure, created enough doubt, isolated me enough from my own reality, I would shatter into the unstable woman he needed me to be. Instead, I became steel, forged in the fire of his betrayal, tempered by the weight of his deception, sharpened by the clarity of absolute truth. And when the moment came to choose between his version of me and my own, I chose myself. Completely, finally, irrevocably. That choice, not the divorce, not the exposure, not even the justice, that choice was my victory. Because in the end, the only person who can save you from someone else's story about you is you. And I saved myself. The house is quiet now, peaceful, mine. And I am exactly who I always was, underneath all the years of trying to be who he needed me to be. I am enough. I was always enough, and no one will ever convince me otherwise again.